Well, welcome back, and it's been a busy week. Hopefully you've had a good week as well. I'm recording this quickly actually on a Friday evening, just before my son comes back and takes over his bedroom, which I'm using as the makeshift YouTube studio at the moment. So as with all things, when you've had a busy week and things have gone well, I do recommend, especially in business, that you celebrate them. So I've got a glass of wine here. If you just excuse me while I have a quick drink. But we'll get on. So, Chapter 4 we're on now, and what I wanted to do in Chapter 4 is talk a little bit about naming a company. So there's lots of advice out on the internet and books about choosing a suitable name for your business. I've got a few suggestions in my book, but just to summarise a few of those now, I would recommend that you choose something that's quite easy to say and is not confusing in terms of its spelling. And that's because as you make your way up in the elevator and make that infamous elevator pitch to an investor or a customer, you want to make sure that when they go away, they remember the name, but also they can look it up. They don't want to be trying to remember how to spell it, or if it's got some unusual spelling, to find it on the internet. So try and keep the name that you choose relatively straightforward and probably phonetic in terms of how it's spelt. The other thing I'd recommend is, of course, choosing something that is a little bit different from everybody else. You want to be differentiated. When somebody looks on the internet to find your company, you don't want them finding, well, certainly not your competitors, but other companies that might be confusing. So I would recommend, before you choose your name, check, of course, that it's available, that it's not an existing name already at Companies House or an equivalent sort of national register of businesses. I would also do an internet search and make sure that the domain name that you're after is available. We come back to talking about domain names a bit later, but although it's not necessary to have a .com, they're still the most common domain names. So if you've got your business.com, that of course I think is preferable, but there are other variations that you might want. The issue, of course, is if there's confusing. If there's a .com which is a different business but has the same spelling as you, that could lead to lost customers in the future. The other thing I talk about actually is product name. So quite often people come up with a company name and then they also come up with a product name. Now that's fine if you're a big business, but you've got to remember that your product is also going to require a lot of marketing effort. And so if your company name and your product name are different, you're going to have to spend twice as much time marketing and developing that brand. So again, my recommendation is try and make your first product or your first service actually synonymous with your company name and just focus on developing that one brand. If you must have a product name, then you've got to go through everything as well. You've got to check whether it exists, whether there are trademarks already in existence by others, whether it's confusing and whether the spelling is confusing when you're pitching about it, but also whether the domain exists, the domain name on the internet and so forth. So you've got twice as much effort if you decide to name your product in addition to your business. So my advice is to avoid that if you can, certainly at the outset. So in my book, I also talk about using company shortcodes and creating those. And you won't be able to see it here necessarily, but there's a little table that details something about that. The company shortcode is something you can use widely within the company documentation. And it's really just an abbreviation that becomes a standard form, mainly for internal use. But it helps with the document control that I mentioned in some of the earlier video clips. And it's useful going forward because you can start making sure that it appears on all your documents and collateral